Hello, everybody, and welcome to Nature Source Care. My name is Dr. Fonda Goldman. I'm a naturopathic physician, and in today's talk, I was going to discuss homeopathy for being judgmental, and specifically the Bach Flower remedy Beech for this type of situation. Just to note beforehand, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical advice. For any symptoms that persist or worsen, please consult with a qualified medical professional. It is always best to determine the root cause of any disease and to develop a comprehensive treatment plan. And while homeopathy Bach Flower remedies can be very effective, they may not be appropriate for everyone or as a single therapy, so please keep that in mind. Okay, so Beech Bach Flower remedy today. Just a few words about Bach Flower remedies generally before we get into that particular remedy. Bach Flower remedies, if you're not familiar, are a kind of homeopathy, which is a whole paradigm of energy medicine. And if you want more background and history, I would check out my first Bach Flower remedy video, Walnut New Beginnings, because I go into much more depth there about the history of homeopathy and Bach Flower remedies. But the general idea of Bach Flower remedies is that disease stems from an inner struggle. And I found in my practice that Bach Flower remedies can be particularly helpful with mental, emotional, and spiritual conditions. And then I have a whole playlist on Bach Flower remedies as well as homeopathy if you want more content like this. But for Beech, a Bach Flower remedy, the key note is intolerant or judgmental behavior. And the inner state of being that's at struggle here is that, excuse me, the person is unable to process similar behavior from other people. So, which is, interesting. Let's get into more details about symptoms. Okay, so, how would we potentially recognize somebody who's in a Beech state? Um, this is somebody who comes across as pretty narrow-minded, hard, intolerant, arrogant, hypercritical, strict, judgmental. These are the sorts of words. So usually they're fairly easy to spot. But the trouble may be is that they may not be interested in a Bach Flower remedy because they might be pretty well entrenched in this state that they're in, actually. Because part of it again is like as I mentioned in the previous slide, is that a lot of people who end up in a Beech state, so when they become hard and critical and intolerant of others, a lot of times they've been on the receiving end of that kind of behavior. And the thing is that rather than processing that hurt or that humiliation or that rejection, that kind of a nasty behavior and thought process towards them, is that they go sort of the other way where they start projecting outward the way other people have towards them. And they create walls. So the way that they're creating walls is by, basically pushing everybody out with this, narrow-minded, judgmental behavior and a thought process. So it's a bit of a, kind of a misuse of protective energy. It can be helpful in some ways because, especially when we're young, like if somebody got bullied for whatever reason, that, it's kind of, especially kids, it's like they don't have a lot of life experience. They don't often have a lot of tools, and depending on the adults who are around them, they may not have a way of talking about it or thinking about it or processing, harsh situations like this that they experience. And so it's like the organism, in and of itself, the mind in and of itself just starts doing this stuff as a defense mechanism. But the problem is that, this can go on, and then this person can actually start behaving similarly to what they experienced. That's created. So it's like this, like, perpetual cycle that's, keeps going. Yeah. So yeah, more here. So not accepting variation in others, like everybody needs to be a certain way. And again, they're projecting outwards, not digesting their own experience. So again, you can get somebody who's been bullied, and it's like the bully who is bullied, you know. So again, they're just sort of like passing along, unfortunately, this maladjusted behavior. And so again, usually somebody who's in a Beech state will have experienced rejection or humiliation or something like that earlier on. they might be part of a minority group, maybe ethnic or religious or, LGBTQIA, anything. You never know. I mean, sometimes it's just being out of town or wearing different clothes or, it can be very, very superficial. Um, and even if they're not part of my minority group, they might feel like an outsider for, again, whatever reason. Maybe they just have different hobbies than the people around them. Like I worked with one kid, special needs kid, and he's an early teen and he liked to sew. And that's not like, especially for guys around here, that's not like a common hobby that guys are into. And the other thing is his parents are pretty affluent. So, again, I would say his mother came across as being quite intolerant of him, and he felt it, even though he's quite young. Like, it seemed like his mother was more into, kind of impressing other people and dressing in really nice clothes and all this. And this kid wasn't really into it. He was interested in making his own clothes and doing his own thing and being very creative, which is, was cool, but I'm not sure his mother saw it like that. So then it started to wear on him because, again, he didn't have a lot of, one awareness. He just felt bad, but he didn't know how to like put words to it, and he didn't know what to do about it. Because especially like usually kids, they're looking for love and acceptance and approval from their parents. Just inherently that happens. So he wasn't at a point where he was strong enough within himself and had the emotional tools within himself to kind of understand where his mother was coming from and not take it personally. It was affecting him deeply. So anyway, and not that, and when I was working, not that he became a bully, but, it looked like for him, he was kind of imploded rather than kind of exploding. So he was throwing it on himself, all those kind of negative feelings he was kind of internalizing and unfortunately making part of his identity rather than like pushing it out and pushing others away, which, who knows, maybe at different stages of life he would do that. It's not hard to imagine in any case. Um, so again, maybe somebody is part of a minority group. Maybe they just feel like an outsider for whatever silly reason. And again, it's not silly what they do. It's just, sometimes it comes down to these really minor things or minor incidences that can really be a big deal for people in terms of the way that they feel and the way that they think. So, um, yeah. So, and again, it's mostly about suppressed emotions that are not processed or somebody is unable to process when they don't know what else to do. Um, so typically, the sort of person in a beach state will see faults of people instead of see their gifts or at least an effort they're making to change or do better. Yeah, they just, again, slice and dice people, unfortunately. So, what this ends up doing is that there can be a lot of withdrawal of self, a lot of isolation of self, and isolation of others. Just, these big walls are created. And again, this value system that they've created is very subjective. I mean, most value systems are. And so, but still the walls come up, potentially to protect themselves, but, and isolate themselves, but they end up isolating themselves from others and again, they're like perpetuating the cycle, and they're treating people the way they were treated. So the risk here again is if this isn't treated or addressed, is that they will, a person in this state will continue to perpetuate this behavior, through society. If they do get treated, like for example, if they pick up this beech Bach flower and it suits their situation, that suits the case, then the potential here is that they will become more sympathetic and more sensitive to others and be more understanding of others and more tolerant. And also be more positive again rather than focusing on faults. Like look at what are people because everybody has faults, but everybody has gifts as well. So it's a matter of like where is your focus. And this person potentially, with this even though they might be hypercritical or whatever, they're noticing subtleties in people. So the thing is, you can use those subtleties against people and reject them and judge them, or you might, by understanding the subtleties of people, like build bridges by saying, this person is really good at this and this person is really good at that, and maybe if you put these two together, they'll be like some super duper combo team. So. And then this person, rather than being exclusive, would be more inclusive of others, more supportive. And there would be this feeling too, like usually when people kind of get into this state of judging others, being critical or intolerant or what have you, essentially the deeper worldview there is that I'm me, you're you, and we're completely separate and different. As opposed to a worldview of you like ultimately, on a deeper level, whether it's spiritually, whether it's genetically, whether it's through evolution or what have you, we're all connected, you know. And if I work on myself and heal myself, I will be working and healing the greater community at large. So it's not like a me them duality type thing, but it's a unity consciousness. Yeah. Um, yeah, and so that we'd seek commonalities rather than differences with others, which would be a potentially good thing. Yeah. Okay, so other remedies you might consider that might seem similar, on the surface, but again, as I've mentioned in these videos, is that the Bach flowers, it's all about the subtleties. So if you understand the subtleties of the remedies or the subtleties of the person, then you're better able to make a good match, and then you'll see the good effects coming. So here's some you might consider, and the ones that have a double asterisk are ones that I have videos on. So I've done most of the Bach flowers by now. I think I only have like 8 or so left. So most of these I've done, but there's still a few I haven't. So the first one that comes to mind is holly. Holly, again, you can get this like when I did that video, I talked about like Scrooge, like somebody who's just, hoarding kind of resources and keeping themselves and, not being very social and things like that. But the crux of that, which again, it's a subtle difference, is that people in a Holly state aren't necessarily seeing the support that life offers them. So they might have had like some disappointment, which was pretty big, and they just hyper focus on that, and they're not seeing that like maybe they had a bad relationship or something. They're not seeing like all the other good relationships in their life, and then they kind of close their heart down. So Holly's more about disappointment and feeling unloved. Um, and again, there might be some overlap there with, maybe the relationship really got nasty and the other person, was sort of a bully or intolerant of them. Um, so again, you'd have to figure out like, is it more of a Holly situation or is it more of a Beech situation? Then there's Vervain. So Vervain, most of the remedies I've listed here, like they all of these remedies have like a kind of intensity. It's mostly about like where the intensity is directed. So with Vervain people, they can be like overzealous and but and really like hardcore kind of crusaders and things like that. But it's mostly about supporting a cause. So it's not about them domineering others or themselves, but they have some cause that they're just on fire about, and so they kind of like overdo it. Like they won't stop talking about the cause, and they won't stop you know doing extreme things to support the cause and stuff like that. But again, that's a pretty intense and kind of controlling energy in a certain direction. Then there's Vine. Vine is about people who, tend to dominate others. This one, there might be, again, there might be some overlap, in terms of like, are they, this one here, like again, the difference between Beech and Vine. Beech is more about building walls to separate and isolate, which can be a way of dominating others. But again, Vine is a little bit more, I think, direct with that. Yeah. But you never know. I mean, some people, that's a technique that they use, right? Like sometimes, you get into a relationship or something, and then, that other person will start isolating you from your friends and family, so that they can control you more. So then you have to figure out, like, is it more of a Vine situation or is it more of a, Beach situation? But beach people don't tend to go quite that far. It's more about like, mentally, again, separating and isolating and categorizing people and, do they check the boxes? Do they not? I don't know. I mean, they won't necessarily like try to steamroll you necessarily, the way a Vine person might. But it's like, whenever I've met, people in a beach state, like you almost feel like they're just in their head, like, like drawing up in their head like a pros and a cons list in their head, or they're just like, oh, doesn't satisfy that. Oh, doesn't satisfy. Um, you can feel them withdrawing internally. I think a lot of times you can feel this sort of coldness coming from them. Yeah, in terms of they're just, assessing you, almost like they're scanning the barcode on your head or something like forehead or something like that. It's kind of a strange feeling, I think. Then other remedies potentially. So pine is another one. The reason why pine is on this list is not because they're particularly aggressive, except that people who need pine are people who are blaming themselves. Rather than, criticizing self, rather than, criticizing or blaming others. Yeah. So again, it's a different focus. Then there's rock water. So this one also can be quite intense. Rock water people are very tend to be very rigid, especially with self. So these are people who like might have a certain routine, or they might have certain, criteria for themselves, or goals for themselves or whatever, and they really just are not, they don't give themselves any space or room. So they're constantly judging themselves. This doesn't necessarily extend to other people, but this is somebody who, if they don't have whatever, if they don't look a certain way, or if they don't have a certain job, or if they don't make a certain amount of money or whatever, they'll just be very, very hard on themselves. Okay. Then there's sort of an extension of rock water in a way, or sort of similar to rock water. Again, a lot of intensity and judgment, but mostly of self, is crabapple. And these are people who are like perfectionistic, and there can even be this level of like self disgust, where again, that's like that where that judgment and stuff is coming in, where it's getting to the point where not only are they rigid with themselves, but they don't even like themselves, So anyway, so again, these are some other remedies you might consider. Um, again, most of them fairly hardcore, but again, the direction of the judgment and all that is different. Then is another thing separate from Bach Flower remedies. Another big thing that I do is Ayurveda, which is traditional Indian medicine. And in that system of medicine, it seems very simple, but it's quite profound. Is that there are essentially three different, very simplistically, there are basically three different types of people, patients, and symptoms. So there are people with too much wind, people with too much fire, and people with too much earth. So the people with too much fire are called pitta. Pitta is kind of a constitutional state, or uh, temporary state that people can be in, where there's like just too much fire. Now, the thing about fire as an element is that it's very intense, right? It's like you touch it and you burn yourself. The other thing is that there's this kind of spreading quality to it. So the thing is that when somebody would show up in most of these states where it's very, where they're really rigid, perfectionistic, overcritical, that sort of thing, from an Ayurvedic point of view, that would be an indication that they're in a high pitta state. So for those of you interested in, Ayurveda, or who do both like I do, you might consider that. And if you don't have much information on Ayurveda or Pitta, I have a video called Ayurvedic Pitta or Fire Diet, which talks about kind of the Pitta profile a little bit more. But even as a starting point, like changing the foods that somebody eats, because again, if somebody, usually my Pitta people, they eat really intense food and really fiery, not just fiery like in terms of temperature wise, but fiery in terms of spicy or bitter or intense foods. Like that's just their nature, and they tend to attract that. But the thing is, those sorts of foods tend to make them more fiery, which would make them more, intense and judgmental and hypercritical, and, potentially, if they're really out of balance, they can be violent, like bullies and stuff like that. Um, so you can see the list and just learn more about Pitta, and that might be another direction to go in terms of helping people. Because again, most people, if they're critical enough, then they'll be critical of you as a practitioner. So they won't be open to these sorts of things. But if you can kind of, move through the door more gently through saying, oh, well, you have a lot of inflammation and you have a lot of stress or something like that. from an Ayurvedic point of view, the Pitta diet, anti-Pitta diet would be helpful. That might start to take the edge off, and then you can work from there. So again, just as another way to help people rebalance themselves potentially. But again, I never suggest people to, override other people's free will. So, consider that as well. All right, so there you go. Some other remedies and potential ways of dealing with somebody in a beat state. Okay, so as always, thanks for stopping by, listening to one of my talks. Yeah, other things you might be interested is that, like I have books on natural medicine that I've written. You can get copies of them on Amazon if you're interested. If you go to the books link and then search under my name, you'll find books that I've written there if you're interested. Like I've have a big one on like nutrition, which is an integrative book on like it integrates Western, traditional, and Ayurvedic nutrition. That can be quite helpful, especially if you're interested in like going into Ayurveda or looking up like Pitta foods and stuff like that. I have another YouTube channel on another Vedic art. It's called Light Vedic Astrology for people who are interested in ancient Indian astrology. And most of the photography I do for my videos, or in my videos, I've done myself. I have an online photography gallery and gift shop. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, you can go to the link there, funda-goldman.fineartamerica.com. All right. So as always, thanks so much for stopping by and all ways that you support my work in the channel. So liking videos, subscribing, posting comments, letting me know what kind of results you're getting, sending in donations, all that. It's all very much appreciated. So thank you for all of that. All right. So until the next one, everybody, you take care. Namaste.